My profession has taken me to all parts of Britain, most of Europe and around the world, including New Zealand, Brazil, Miami, India, Iceland. In Jamaica, I twice played pirates in quite different versions of Treasure Island. In the TV version of Return to Treasure Island, the story carried on from the original. The idea was that Long John Silver, played brilliantly by Brian Blessed, had not only survived, but intended to carry on with his plots and skullduggery and mayhem. My character, Caleb Lewis, was a kind of Arthur Daly of the Caribbean, skimming and fencing the produce off the plantations. The cast and crew were all booked into the same hotel. It was great. It had its own beach, regular poolside meets and greets, rum punch barbecues, all the water sports, coral-seeking boat trips, all inclusive for hotel guests. And on our R&R days, we were able to take full advantage of what was on offer. On this shoot, I had quite a few days off, waiting for them to get to me. I was only in Jamaica to shoot 1 or 2 scenes. Most of my stuff would be filmed later in a studio on Barry Island in South Wales. The weather was all blue skies and hot, hot, hot. I'd been living in a pair of shorts and T-shirts, sunning myself, generally playing at being on holiday. My filming day arrived. I was picked up from the hotel. My character, having left his buccaneering days behind him, had done very well for himself, which reflected in his mode of dress. My costume consisted of high leather boots, jodhpur-type trousers, a thick cotton shirt, a waistcoat, a thick top coat, a long curly wig all topped off by a 3-corner hat, and a smart dress sword. I waited on the jetty for action to be called. I felt like I was trussed up like a roast joint sizzling in the oven. I think I heard the call of action just before I passed out. The next thing I remember, my head was resting on the ample bosom of the unit nurse, who was holding a cool flannel to the back of my neck. The car was brought up. I was dispatched back to the hotel. The next day I'd recovered, but the shooting had moved on to a different location. I had to put up with another week of sun, sea and sand before they got to my scene again. And this time I was prepared, dressed in as little of my costume as possible before they got close to calling action. The scenes went well, and I was driven post-haste back to the hotel in case I had another touch of the sun. It might seem odd or even wasteful to have actors waiting around to work, especially in exotic locations, but the nature of filming is such that things often change due to weather, unseen events or accidents, like actors getting injured or fainting in the heat. I mean, the whole unit, 50 to 100, have travelled a long way to shoot a TV series or a movie. Second-guessing what might go wrong or develop because of changes of circumstances has to be covered. I was getting quite a bit of work around that time. I was in an episode of The Monocled Mutineer. It's about the First World War, starring Paul McGann. I played a medical sergeant in the trenches. We filmed on a peat farm in Somerset, and it was hot and it was muddy, very different from Jamaica. I was in Silas Marner, starring Ben Kingsley. And my son, in the series, married Silas Marner's daughter, played by the 15-year-old Patsy Kensit. It was some 3 years later when I found myself once again in Jamaica. This time, it was the film of the original story of Treasure Island, starring Charlton Heston as Long John Silver. Most of us, the cast, were housed in a villa complex, and the actor Clive Wood and I shared a villa. Our villa had a cook-housekeeper attached to it, so we were well looked after. I played the very unmemorable part of Job Anderson, the ship's boatswain. Well, I know who he is. During filming, I realised I had more than a touch of the old sea dog in my veins, possibly inherited from my merchant seaman grandfather, Albert Putt. We were filming about 20 miles out at sea on a 3-mast pirate ship when the waves began to buffer us about. I thought it was great fun, hanging on to the rigging and enjoying the ride. Because the rough sea was bouncing the equipment and crew and cast around, we had to stop filming. Many of the cast and crew were also chucking up over the side, suffering from seasickness. Feeling fine, I decided to climb out onto the female effigy stuck at the prow of the ship to get more of a ride. It was very exhilarating, feeling the undulating bounce with the spray of the sea in my face, My ride was further enhanced by the flying fish who were jumping up either side of me. I thought at the time one of my favourite artists, J.M.W. Turner, would surely approve. Legend has it that Turner had tied himself to a prow of a ship on a rough sea to absorb what it was like, to help him create the feeling in his paintings. One well-known member of the cast of Treasure Island, who sadly passed away, so I'll refer to him as Chum, gave me a slice of cake wrapped in foil as I was being dropped off after a day's shoot. I thought at the time, well, that was nice, but an odd thing to do. Well, when I got to the villa, I put the kettle on and ate the cake. A bit later, Chum popped round. "Enjoy the cake, son." I remember saying, "Eating it," and Chum replying, "You've eaten all of it." I kept dropping in and out of consciousness because he neglected to tell me it was a space cake. I should have realised. Who surreptitiously palms a mate a slab of cake wrapped in foil with a wink and says nothing? My drug days were very much behind me. My brain and my body was not prepared to deal with so much impregnated dope in one go. I did not realise it at the time what was happening. But after Chum put me wise and many cups of hot sweet coffee later, I began to enjoy the dope's soporific effect. But these days my drug of choice is a glass of wine or beer with a good meal, preferably shared with chums. Charlton Heston liked to be called Chuck, like George Sewell, and the cast and crew had quite a few northern folk in the rank, and they had no trouble of saying, "All right, Chuck," whenever they saw him. It was funny at the time, but maybe you had to be there. I was fortunate once again to have quite a lot of free time and spent much of it on the beach or by the villa complex pool. Lucky old me, eh? One day off I hired a car and driver to take me on a tour of the island, culminating at an old cow's house, Firefly. I was shown round by a guide, and being the only visitor that day, I had the place to myself. The house was in need of repair. The roof was covered by some weatherproofing material. The paint all around was flaky. The whole place looked as if it was going to crumble into the rocks below. My guide told me the government wasn't interested in renovating the house, and if nothing was done, it will soon be closed to the public. The view over the bay was spectacular. I could almost see Noel sitting there on a deck chair, wearing a Panama hat, waiting for the muse to inspire him once more. The villa where I was staying had a wonderful aspect too, set high up above the bay. Our evenings were often spent sitting on the patio overlooking Errol Flynn's island, where I believe his wife lived or had a house. Sitting at the table of the patio with the fireflies dancing around the oil lamp, being served a scrumptious meal by our cook, enjoying reddish-brown sunsets, I thought, "Oh yes, my son, this is why you joined." Unfortunately, jobbing actors like myself, work like that comes around rarely, if at all. But oh, what a joy if and when it does. One interesting occurrence in the villa, every morning I noticed low down behind a pot plant, sitting on the wall, was a large moth or butterfly. I'm not sure which, because in that part of the world creatures have evolved very differently and on a grander scale than they have in Britain. The wall was pristine white and the creature was coloured a reddish brown, therefore hard to miss. It was about the size of my hand, always in the same place by the pot, and seemingly waiting for the glass patio doors to open, because as soon as I opened the doors it would fly off. It happened every morning I was there, waiting to be let out. I never saw it return at night, but when I came down the stairs, in the morning, there it was, settled, like a trained pet, waiting to take off for the day. I returned home dark brown by the Caribbean sunshine. I'd just had a glimmer of what many film stars probably take for granted. My agent had arranged for me to meet the Monty Python creator Eric Idle at his house for a part in The Ruttles, a comic send-up of the Beatles' rise to fame. The story was devised by Eric Idle, with Neil Innes writing the songs. Eric's house was quite a walk from the tube station. It was pissing down, and as I approached, his face appeared at the window, as if he was watching out for me to arrive, which he was. He opened the door and showed me into the front room, where I was generally introduced to Neil and a few other people sitting around. In the corner of the room was a mushroom-shaped stand with a TV attached to it. Eric pushed a plastic case into the slot at the bottom of this machine, and clips of the Beatles performing on the Ed Sullivan Show appeared on the TV screen. Now, I'd never seen a video player before, and I think this was probably one of the first to reach these shores. No one else seemed amazed by the phenomenon but me. I was wowing and awing all over the place. The others sat back making casual remarks, as if watching a pre-recorded clips on a TV produced from a plastic box you inserted into the base of it was an everyday occurrence. Or perhaps for them it was. After the viewing, we went downstairs to the kitchen, where sat, as large as life, with two pretty oriental-looking girls, George Harrison. I was gobsmacked already by the Beatle clips. Now there was one sitting at a table. I was not really introduced. Of course I knew him, but he did not, and showed no inclination to know me or even acknowledge that I'd entered the room. Eric said, "I think you know everyone here, Robert." "Oh, yeah, right. Aye. Hello, George." I shuffled to my seat. I couldn't take my eyes off the legend sitting in the corner, further endorsing my plebeian credentials. George was telling a story about the Sergeant Pepper days and the acid intake that allegedly seemed to be going on then. To say I was feeling awkward and out of place was an understatement. I think I was only there really to be shown that George was in the house. I sat there listening to the chat. Eventually the mood shifted up a bit, and George sent the girls on an errand to buy him a couple of white shirts and pants to wear because they were going out later. Pristine white togs seemed to be the trendy shade that season. Perhaps he didn't want to go home to change, or maybe that is what he did all the time, adapt to the scene as it happens. I heard myself say, "White, yeah, good. Very fashionable, white." My remark fell on deaf ears, or ears that seemed only tuned into a different dimension that I did not inhabit. The girls left to go on their George errand. There followed a bit of a hiatus. Eric turned to me, "Robert, we must get ready. We're going out to dinner." Was I being invited to join them? Maybe I could call the girls back and give them my size for a white-up. "It was nice to meet you, Robert. I'll see you out." "Oh, right, yeah. Goodbye, George." When I got the job, I was to play the Ruttles roadie, but that was all I was told. There was no script, just turn up. The next time I met George was on the first filming day. He was dressed as a character in a little grey suit and sporting a tiny stuck-on moustache. "Hello, George," I said. "You look a bit like Anthony Eden." Eden was the very staid and Edwardian-looking Prime Minister of the 1950s, not the image that a rock or this rock star needed to hear. I could tell by his indignant response, "You are Anthony Eden." I realised I was not endearing myself to Georgie boy. I was further at sea when not having a script. Eric, the writer-director and numero uno, seemed to have the only script or storyboard outline on a notebook he constantly referred to. And together with Neil's songs, they seemed to be making the story up as they went along. Geniuses, eh? I was given the odd line to say or pulled into a scene. It looked as if there was some scripted dialogue given to the actors playing the Ruttles. The only idea seemed to be about my character, the roadie, was to be seen wearing hand-me-down clothes that the Ruttles had been wearing previously. But that was it. I felt at times I was back in the actor's nightmare, where everyone knows the plot but me. One or two Monty Python actors popped in, like Michael Palin for a day's filming, who seemed to know exactly what was expected of them, to Python it up a bit. No one told me to goon about like a loon and see what evolves. I would have given it my best shot. Ronnie Wood appeared at one point, and Bianca Jagger showed up in Liverpool for a day's filming. One cast member, I think he was playing George in the Ruttles, was a weedy American guy who apparently played with the Beach Boys at some stage in his sad career. He kept trying to put me down and took great pleasure in pulling faces at me. I knew this guitar-plucking goon was well connected. Maybe he was a close chum of George, who might have had a grouch to him about me. Heaven forfend The idiot may have disliked me for just being, well, me. I felt at the time having a strict word with him would have been out of order, so I did my best to ignore him. On retrospect, it was obvious they really didn't know what to do with me. I was with them but not of them, and I never found my inner python. If you see the first Ruttles movie, every time I'm about to appear, the film cuts or fades to the next scene, as if I'm being used as an editing point, so don't blink. For some reason, my name appears on the album cover. I heard later that EMI, or some such mogul of the day, sued Neil for plagiarising the Beatles songs, which they own the rights to. I think after the case, they gave Neil the money back as a fee for him to write something for them. But don't quote me on it, it's only what I heard. The Beatles were part of the soundtrack of all our lives back in the 60s and 70s, and their music still resounds to this day. Whatever my crass remarks provoked in the late lamented Beatle George Harrison, it does not stop me from being a fan, and I can still be moved listening to him playing and singing his song while my guitar gently weeps. If you are new to film and TV, in regard to any physical stunts, don't blindly believe anyone that tells you to stop worrying, all will be well. If you are worried about an action, then all is not well. For a start, you cannot attempt, attack, or fully concentrate on some business or stunt if you are uncertain about it. I was playing a good part as a villain in one episode of a TV series called Targets, starring Patrick Moore. In the last scene, I was due to race down the runway of a private airfield, trying to catch up and escape on the plane that was taxiing fast for takeoff. I knew that I and another actor was going to be pursued by the police and some dogs. I discovered that the dogs were going to be chasing us off the leash. I was concerned. I expressed my concern to my actor colleague, who didn't want to make waves, and was of the opinion they must know what they're doing. I went over to take a look at the 4 large dogs caged in their metal mesh pens to say hello, and received a lot of growling and barking in reply. I asked the dog handler how well trained were his dogs, like what happens when they catch up to us, which was not only probable, but a dead cert. No man could outrun these mutts. My concern was, in all the excitement of the chase, my person might get bitten, with the dog's teeth sinking through the thin material of my smart mohair suit. The handler tried to convince me that his dogs knew the difference between cloth and flesh. Yeah, right. I popped to the wardrobe department to ask if they had arranged for some bite-proof padding to fit under an arm of my suit. I thought if I was ambushed on the ground, I could offer a protective arm for the mutts to gnaw on, keeping them busy until cut was called and I could be rescued. The wardrobe department had not been given any instructions about protective clothing and had nothing in stock. Some attempt was made by padding my arm out with bandages wrapped around those looped sanitary towels which girls used to wear then. Fuck this, I thought, forget it. A gummy bullfrog could bite through this cotton wad. I went to the director, Jim, and explained my concern. Jim's reaction, eyes rolling, arms spread akimbo, said it all. There we go, fucking actors making waves. I responded with, Jim, no way will I be running up the airfield being chased by those dogs unless they are on leads attached to the handlers or stunt people. I was adamant, and he had no choice but to agree to my conditions, or I would not be running up any airfield. It was just as well, because one particular dog, the one who snarled the most when I introduced myself to them earlier, pulled his handler with such force to reach me, and managed to actually sink his teeth through my suit. Thankfully, the beast was restrained enough by the handler to only leave a bloody graze. I mean, what would have become of me if I hadn't kicked up a fuss? Always, if I am in any way uncertain about some action I am required to do, I ask the director, the first assistant, or stunt arranger to show me what they mean. The Green Green Grass was a spin-off of Only Fools and Horses by the late John Sullivan. I played the barman in the first series. We had this scene with Morris dancers in the bar. The Morris men were to leap about wearing white jodhpurs, funny hat, bells on their ankles, waving and bashing big sticks together all over the place. My written action was to weave and duck between them, carrying a tray of glasses. The Morris dancers were not trained actors who could dance, adjust, and be aware of me in their midst. The first assistant director called action for the rehearsal. The dancers hopped about, clunking away with their wooden sticks. The AD then waved me on to weave through them, but as I didn't move, she called cut. "What's wrong, Bob?" "It looks a bit tricky. Could you just show me how you want it done?" To her credit, she laughed and realised that it hadn't been thought through properly, so it was decided I will circle around the edge of the dancers instead. It's not always when one is acting on set that things can become risky if you aren't paying attention to what is occurring. I was playing a touring band manager in a Vauxhall car commercial, shooting by the ski slopes in Aviemore in the Scottish Highlands. The setup was something like my vehicle had broken down in the snow, and the passing Vauxhall, of course, had no problem coping with the weather conditions. It was bloody cold with blizzards blowing, and folk were still going up the ski lifts to slide back down again. Not my idea of a holiday jaunt. In my opinion, if God had meant us to slide about on the ice, we'd have all had very long feet. We had been shooting all day, and it was getting late, but our director, Tom, against all advice, insisting on shooting just one more take, then one more, then another. By the time we wrapped, you could not see further than a yard or so ahead. A shoot, even for a 2-minute commercial, can have catering trucks, crew wagons, wardrobe and makeup trailers, plus various unit vehicles, as this one did. 4 of us got into a car to be taken back to the hotel. We were using the hairdresser's motor, driven by him because all the unit cars and drivers were occupied. The makeup artist sitting next to me was heavily pregnant. As soon as we set off, the car began to slide and skid about. Our hairdresser driver struggled to keep us from slipping over the edge where the ski slopes were. I could see out my window and the abyss was getting ever closer. I was not happy, and my pregnant travelling companion seemed ready to give birth. The wheels of the car began to spin in the snow, digging us deeper in. We all got out the car to lighten the load, and our dresser driver managed to slide over to a more central position, well away from the edge, and we climbed back in. We made slow and careful progress, driving more or less in a straight line, until we arrived at the back of the convoy of unit trucks, none of which were moving. We stayed parked up, waiting for something to happen. Someone made contact with a crew member on a walkie-talkie. There were no mobile phones those days, to find out why they had stopped. The instruction came back that the whole convoy is stuck in the snow and we are waiting for a snowplow to lead us out, which is what happened. All this occurred because Tom, our director, insisted on 1 or 2 takes too many and would not heed the warning weather signs. To finish the shoot, there was yet one more take in the car park of our hotel the next morning. I swear, that was what you mostly saw on the TV screen, close-up of actors in the snow that could have been shot anywhere. It was such a whiteout. It seemed to me we could have stayed for as many takes as you like a few feet away from the hotel's entrance. They could have pre-shot scenes, using stunt drivers in wide shots, motoring through the snow by the slopes. Eyesight is a wonderful thing, I suppose, and maybe the weather wasn't so bad when our director went on a recce to find the right location, but it could have been Splat City for 4 artists plus a babe yet born. I was laying back in the bath, luxuriating in the soothing suds, in joyful anticipation of the next couple of days, of eating, drinking, and generally catching up with some old friends, Jean and George, who were joining us for the Easter weekend. Our chums were driving down from Liverpool and should be arriving around tea time. It was now about 10 a.m. on the Saturday morning. Barbara had popped out to the hairdresser's for a trim. I don't have much to do with the barber's chair myself, as my hair has stopped growing to just above my ears. I settled back, soaking in the soap suds with joyful anticipation of the long weekend ahead, when suddenly my reverie was interrupted by the phone ringing. Now, being an actor, like many of my ilk, if a phone starts to ring, it doesn't matter where one is, what day it is, or what one is doing, the first thing that comes to mind is, I wonder if that could just be my agent. Honestly, I could be promenading on holiday by a sunny shore in a far-off land, and if I hear a phone ringing nearby, the first thought that can pop into my head is that call for me? Maybe someone had to drop out of a show, and I, the actor known as Robert Putt, not Pugh or Peck, and the only one the director wants to take over the part, and someone has seen me approaching the phone box from the hotel, and of course, knowing the phone box number, calls it just as I am passing. Yeah, I know. I'm getting a bit carried away here, but you catch my drift. Even though it was an Easter Saturday, I thought I'd better answer it. After all, it just might be our travelling guests who have encountered some problem on the way. These were the thoughts floating through my noddle as I rose up dripping suds like a frothy snowman from the bathtub. I now know one must really concentrate while getting out the bath. My mind was focusing on the phone ringing and who it might be. I do remember lifting one leg up and out of the bathtub and attempting to place it on the floor. I think my toes actually touched the bath mat. The next thing, I was lying on top of the mat with my face pushed up hard against the wall, with a numbing sensation around my mouth and tasting blood. As I felt myself swooning into a dark hole, the thing that kept me conscious was the sound of the phone ringing, and still the thought that I must answer it. Holding on to the side of the bath, I slowly pulled myself up from the floor. I had to lean against the sink to fight off the dizzy swoon threatening to sink me back down again. I knew immediately what had happened. I'd slipped forward onto the towel rail. Now the rail was made of metal, and I'd fallen onto it in the full force of my body. I weigh in at 90 kilos, that's 40 stone in old money, so it was quite a tumble. I wasn't in any pain, only a numbness in the centre of my face, and a mouthful of mushy jelly with bits in it. I straightened up and looked at the bathroom mirror to inspect the damage. The front top part of my gum, with some teeth still attached, was set back at the rear of my mouth, leaving a gash wide enough to fit the tip of my index finger into. I realised immediately it would take more than a plaster and a stiff drink to repair the damage. I thought of driving myself to the hospital, but still feeling quite woozy, I knew that I must phone for an ambulance. As I made my way to the bedroom, incredulously the phone was still ringing, or maybe it started up again. I can't quite remember. I picked it up. Hesh! It was my daughter Sarah phoning to thank me for the surprise Easter egg I'd left in her flat for her when she returned home after staying with some friends overnight. Sarah, I had a hash in the bathroom. I must phone a ambulance, I squished. Oh, right. I dialed 999 and lisped through my swollen squishy maw the reason for my call to the emergency operator. By the time I had dressed and slowly trod down the stairs, the doorbell was ringing. I thought, well, it can't be the ambulance yet. It's been less than 10 minutes since I phoned. I opened the front door, and behold, there they were, 2 paramedics standing with the ambulance parked in the street behind them, with its blue lights flashing. Cracky, you were quick. One said we were just returning to the hospital when we got the call. I asked where they were taking me. I wrote Ealing Hospital on a notepad, together with some cash, and I placed it on the dining room table. I knew Sarah would be making her way to the house, and as usual short of money. As they took me out to the ambulance, I asked, could they stop on their way and get my wife out from the hairdresser's? Another said, we aren't allowed to leave the ambulance unattended with a patient on board. We could stop outside and you could go into the shop and fetch her out, if you're able to, but it would be your responsibility. I refused the wheelchair offered to take me to the ambulance and insisted on walking. I sat back in the ambulance as it drove off, turned right and parked by the parade of shops at the top of the road. The back door was opened and one paramedic helped me out of the ambulance onto the pavement. With a bloody stained cloth held to my mouth, I nervously entered this hallowed female emporium. The sweet scent of chemicals in the warm air filled my nostrils as I tentatively opened the door. To the right of the shop sat a line of ladies waiting to have their Easter coiffure. Heads lifted from magazines to see who had just entered. Now, correct me if you want, but of all the sights the ladies expected to see coming through the door, I am fairly certain that I wasn't it. The looks on their faces quickly expressed the full range of thoughts and emotions from inquiry, surprise, shock, fear and trepidation. I imagine there were other forebodings on the lines of, "What can this bleeding bloke want? Not a trim, that's for sure. What did he intend doing? And were they expected to do something apart from finding an escape route if he turned nasty?" All right, once again, I may be letting my imagination push the envelope a tad. I know I can't absolutely be certain of what was actually flashing through their minds, but I'm pretty sure I've come close. As I stood dripping in the doorway, with the blood-stained cloth over my mouth, I tried to look as apologetic as possible, which isn't easy without a reassuring smile to back it up. The sight I'd seen in the bathroom mirror nearly made me feel my pants. There was no need to subject these already frightened females to the same horror show and indignity. The paramedics might have a more serious problem on their minds if one of the ladies had a weak heart. Could I be charged with manslaughter? As the saloon was open plan, it only took a moment for the crimpers and trimmers working further inside to sense something was untoward had occurred. One girl glanced up and over from a seated customer towards the door. Her eyes widened to such a degree, retina detachment threatened. The woman sitting in the chair, with her hair pinned up to one side, was Barbara. I walked slowly towards her. My beloved was staring in the mirror at the reflection of the bloody apparition closing behind her. Like Banquo's ghost, what bloody man is this? I could see her fearful confusion as she made the connection that it was her bleeding bald husband unexpectedly creeping towards her. "I had a accident, love." She looked up from her chair at her hairdresser like a frightened child needing guidance, making a sort of mime around her head that seemed to say, "What shall I do? My hair isn't done. What shall I do?" The hairdresser stood back and waving frantically at Barbara rasped, "Go, go," wanting desperately for this bloody man not good for custom to be gone. Barbara stood up slowly, and hoping, as she told me later, that she was having a bad dream, that she would soon wake up and all would be well. With her hair still pinned up to one side, my beloved followed me out of the shop, into the street to the waiting ambulance. By the time the ambulance door closed behind us, Barbara knew this was really happening and there would be no waking up. I explained what happened as we sped, sirens blaring, through the traffic. Although we were both still in shock, we were more concerned about our travelling guests. There was no way of contacting our chums to explain how things had fared thus far with us on this Easter Saturday. This was long ago, when the mobile phone was only just becoming a yuppie dream. Not like today, a must-have indispensable accessory for us all. The only previous occasion I'd seen one such apparatus was on a train, when a rail official opened an attaché case and took out an almost domestic-sized handset he dialed but couldn't get through. "Modern technology, eh?" he uttered to those of us looking curiously at this wondrous invention. On reaching Ealing Hospital, we were deposited in the Accident and Emergency Department. I sat down with a kidney bowl to hold under my chin. There were a few people waiting to be seen ahead of me, but none looked as if their plight was as urgent as mine. No one else was holding a kidney bowl under their chin, ready to catch the blood and any bits of gum and tooth that might come loose. No one seemed to be holding an injured limb, and I couldn't see anyone stretched out on a gurney in obvious pain. About 20 minutes passed and Sarah arrived. Now Sarah, being the efficient floor manager she is, and as I've mentioned before, known as Bossy Boots by our colleague at the BBC, when she wants a thing to happen, it usually does. Sarah disappeared, and a nurse was soon inspecting me, taking my personal details, my name, address, my GP, married or single, details about my injury, and do I have any other health problems, all of which could be thankfully answered for me. Eventually I was taken behind the scenes, and there to be examined further by another senior-looking nurse, and was told a doctor will be with you shortly. Once again we seemed to be waiting with such an inordinate length of time. We thought we must have been forgotten. The minutes ticked by. No one popped their head around the door to reassure us that I shall be soon attended to. Not a footfall could be heard by a soul actually passing by the cold bare room we were waiting in. Once again, our determined daughter went in search of an assistant. Barbara could have gone too, but with her hair short and partly pinned up to one side of her head, and she looked like she may have had some mishap or accident herself, and not wanting to complicate matters, we thought it best she stayed put. Sarah quickly returned with the doctor. This so-called doctor roughly lifted back my top lip, as if he was assessing the age of an old horse, and said, "No orthodontist in hospital. You must make appointment with GP." Now, correct me if you think I'm overreacting here, but I got the distinct impression that he was not up to scratch with how things are done in an English A&E hospital department, even one as short-staffed as this appeared to be. The only other thing that was blatantly obvious, his command of the English language seemed very limited. Could it be that a proper doctor, any doctor, wasn't available, and being so short-staffed, had they been desperate enough to cut along to the nearby Heathrow airport and hold up a card maybe, reading something like, "Anyone with any medical knowledge at all, please make yourself known to us," and ask this chap to stand in for a few hours? Maybe the proper medical team were resting up, having a lay-in in preparation for the Saturday night drink-fueled rush hour that lay ahead. The three of us looked up at this man, trying to comprehend what he was saying. I was expected to make an appointment with my own doctor so he could refer me to an orthodontist because they did not have one at this hospital. Well, you'd be lucky to get to your GP in the same weekday, let alone the weekend, never mind an Easter weekend. Getting an appointment to see a specialist at an NH hospital, even via your GP, can take forever, unless you are terminally ill. Our combined reaction went something like this. Barbara, "You're joking." Sarah, "Fuck off." Shmee, "Sure, can't expect me to leave." Thankfully, the senior nurse, having assessed the situation, took charge and reassuringly informed us that she had made arrangements for me to be seen at the Charing Cross Hospital, and by the time I get there a team of people would be waiting for my arrival, X-ray department and a qualified on-call orthodontist. Getting to Charing Cross Hospital might take some time because we would have to wait for an ambulance to become available, or we phoned for a minicab to take us. And when we arrived at the hospital, a team of people were indeed waiting for us, and I was ushered into the X-ray department. My mouth and surrounding area of my face were X-rayed. I was then examined by a smiling, chatty orthodontist, a nice man considering he had, as I discovered, been called away from his family, enjoying the Easter weekend together. My faith in our NHS was restored by this lovely doctor who knew exactly what was needed, how it would be done, and was prepared to get to work on my damaged teeth and gums straight away. It was getting late by this time, and our guests were soon to be arriving from Liverpool, and as I've said, in those mobile-free days, we had no way of contacting them, so we thought it best for Barbara, who had by now rearranged her hair at the back of her head in a sort of bun, that she should get a cab home, leaving Sarah with her injured pa. The orthodontist deadened my mouth with a collection of injections. The lower part of my jaw felt as if it was a padded lump hanging below my nose, attached to the area deep inside my septum. As I lay back, the nice man shoved his fingers deep inside my mouth, and with a firm yank pulled and pushed my teeth and gums up to where they belong. He motioned Sarah to inspect the site, assessing whether my teeth were in the same place as they were before. Sarah wasn't certain, but thought it looked okay. My gum was stitched back and held together with a plastic brace to hold my teeth in place. Looking like a battered boxer wearing a gum shield, we thanked the nice orthodontist for giving up the best part of his Easter Saturday and found a cab to take us home. It was then about 6 p.m, which meant it had been some 7 hours since I was luxuriating in a nice soap-sudsed bath looking forward to the weekend ahead. I walked into our dining room to find my beloved wife and old chums had been knocking a hole in the booze supplies while waiting for my return to join them for a supper of pizza and trimmings. As we didn't quite know what time our guests would be arriving, we thought pizza would be a practical food option. More exotic meals, you understand, were to follow over the holiday. I don't want you thinking we were a family who troughed out on junk food. I looked across at my beloved, weaving about in the kitchen, holding a baking tray with an unheated pizza on it, trying to negotiate the heated black hole under the hob known as the oven. I had a vision of us returning to the hospital with my love suffering from first-degree burns. I, in my injured condition, I, who should be the one laying on the sofa to be fussed over and tenderly administered to, I, the walking wounded, had to take over the warming up of the pizza to feed my hungry, sozzled friends and spouse. My chum George, a man always enjoying a good skit at the expense of others, quipped, "You'll not be able to have much of a drink with those deadened lips, will you, son?" But I proved him wrong, and producing a straw from the cupboard, and slurped away at a large glass of something that really hit the spot. Why we had such things as straws in the cupboard, I'm not sure, but I'm glad we did. Sarah had stayed long enough to say hello and goodbye to our guests before taking the cab to her flat. She also thanked me once again for her surprise Easter egg, forgetting it was her phone call that started all this in the first place. Of course, I didn't blame Sarah. If anyone was to blame, it was me, hurrying out of the bath without taking due care and attention. Later, chum George, with a cheeky evil grin spread across his chubby face, produced a paper bag and lifted out a large Easter egg in a brightly coloured box, saying, "Well, I don't suppose you'll be wanting this right now then, will you?" That was probably the last Easter egg I brought Sarah. It was certainly the last one I remember buying. How could I forget it? Besides, she's too old for them now. What I do remember buying as soon as the shops were open after the holiday was one of those new cordless phones that had just come on the market. And these days, when I take a bath, the cordless house phone and my mobile are within easy reach, with a notepad and pen nearby, just in case I might miss that very urgent call from my agent. Sarah has met and married Richard, a lovely man who really cares for her. In 2006, due to her past ill health, Sarah had to take early retirement because the work was becoming too much for her. Sarah and Richard now live in Raglan, a small village in Monmouthshire, South Wales. The village has a yearly music festival, and Sarah's floor managing skills she gained while working on the top of the pops for the BBC have proved very useful, and Richard, who can play a guitar and sing a bit, puts together a band for the festival. Miraculously, not long after moving to Wales, Sarah has now had a pancreas transplant, one of the very first to have the operation, and she is no longer a diabetic and fitter than she's ever been for years.